In this video, we'll explore the link between good and evil, and specifically, whether or not it is possible to have good without evil, and if not, then is good inextricably linked to evil? Now, we're joined here by Philip, who is most undoubtedly good and evil combined, and let's get started. So if we pick up a piece of litter on the beach or on the road, is that good? And since I don't like seeing litter on the beach and on the road, and since some forms of litter on the beach can become a problem for sea animals, and I don't enjoy sea animals being strangled by beer packs and things of that nature, I would say that picking up the litter is good. So then comes the question about the link, because is it possible to pick up a piece of garbage if somebody did not litter or create the piece of garbage? So then we have to go into, is it good or bad, or in the extreme evil? Which I like the way that, since we make all of this up with language anyway, that evil is live spelled backwards. So you have to live is good, and the opposite of living is evil. And that somewhat ties in with the idea of not wanting to unnecessarily kill birds, etc., strangled in garbage. So we come back to, is it bad to create garbage, to turn energy, natural resources, into a form that we don't know what to do with? And secondly, having created the energy into a form we don't know what to do with, throw it on the road or throw it on the beach and allow animals to strangle and end up dead on the beach or in the ocean. And I would say that it's bad to throw garbage on the beach and on the road. That's why it's good to pick it up. But of course, these actions are very closely linked, because you cannot do the good thing, which is to pick it up, unless somebody does the bad thing, which is to throw it on the ground in the first place. And we can look at this polarity in any situation. Let's say your 6-year-old child is holding a gun to their head and planning on pulling the trigger. Maybe they're curious, and you could say, is their curiosity good? And here you could say that it's conditional. Curiosity is good when it leads to doing things that we think are good, and curiosity is bad when it leads to doing things that we think are bad. Or that curiosity is good, but some of the consequences of curiosity are bad. Do we want to have to clean up our son's corpse and scrape the blood off the floor because they were curious? So we would have to say that that's bad. That's certainly not pleasant, which ties into one of our correlations to good and bad, which is that if something feels good, it's good. And if something feels bad, it's bad. Why is it bad to kill sea animals with garbage dumped in from cruise ships? Why is that bad? Well, for a healthy human being, it feels bad. If you look at a beautiful fish swimming along and then you see the fish swim into a six-pack and then later you see the fish dead or contorted or, giving birth to mutated baby fish. A sociopath, of course, finds that curious or delightful. But to a healthy human being, that is not sadistic and masochistic primarily, there's a certain sadness in seeing the interrupted beauty in nature. So we would say that's bad. Why? Because it feels bad to a healthy human heart to see unnecessary suffering, whether it's one's self, whether it's one's partner, or whether it's a culture, or whether it's a fish or a child. It feels bad. Pain, discomfort, anger, anxiety, depression, sadness, grief, fear. It feels bad to see unnecessary suffering. And what feels good? Well, there was the fish struggling in the six-pack and someone took a scissors and broke the six-pack and the fish came back to health and swam faster and swam healthier. And that's good. And if you put a vial of poison and suddenly you see all those healthy swimming fish just die, and then they, when a fish dies, it comes up to the surface. First it bloats, gases are released in the body, then it comes up to the surface, and then it produces a foul, fishy odor of dead, decaying fish floating on the top of the water. And that can lead to algae. If the fish are not eating plankton, etc., and they're rotting fish and there's nothing to absorb that nutrients, algae comes in to absorb the nutrients. And, what's your opinion on algae? You like looking at algae consuming rotting fish? It's beneficial. It's not beneficial. Algae is a more debatable topic. Is it good? Is it bad? Of course, scientifically, it's doing something. It's part of nature's ecology for digesting rotting fish on the water is algae. But do you enjoy looking at algae as much as you enjoy looking at a swimming ecology, a vibrant ecology of fish that are mostly not dead, and smelling the scent of salt air that is not perfumed by rotting fish? So is that good or bad? So if it's bad to just wantonly kill fish by throwing dynamite or poison into the water for no particular reason other than to kill the fish, or thoughtlessness, if that's bad because it leads to a less pleasant experience, certainly for the fish, then is it good to stop the person from pouring the vial, to protest and say, no, that's wrong. Don't kill innocent fish by throwing a vial of poison into the water. However, if it is good to stop someone throwing poison into the water, is it possible to stop someone poisoning the water if they're not doing it in the first place? If somebody is not about to throw poison into the water, is it possible to stop them? In other words, is it possible to do that good deed of protest if they're not going to do it in the first place? is it possible to be a whistleblower about a crime that nobody is committing? Hello, my boss might have been thinking at some point of doing this, according to me, and I'm blowing the whistle. I'm being courageous. I'm afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid of this and that and the other, but my boss might be thinking, or might have been thinking about doing this 10 years ago. And I just wanted everyone to know. Oh, the reaction might be, stop wasting our time. We've all thought about certain things 10 years ago. Why are you bringing this up? Why do we need to know that? And if you're that bored, maybe you should lose your job because, you're not doing your job. You're wasting our time talking about something that somebody might have thought about 10 years ago. So no courageous act there. However, what if I manage to induce? What if I manage to incite my boss? Remind them of how horrible the government is doing and how much they're ruining our business, etc. And then maybe they say, you're right, the government is horrible and it is ruining our business. They're blocking this, they're blocking that. So maybe we should, be entitled to embezzle some money and not declare revenue or something and grow our company and not pay as much taxes, for example. Well, then we could perhaps be a whistleblower because we could say that the government is good for raising taxes because governments are good and they spend money efficiently and they do things for the public interest. And so the fact that the government is raising more and more money and making businesses struggle to pay the taxes is good because, they're going to do good things with that money. Or we could say that the government is bad, and so they never spend money as efficiently as a private citizen. And so every extraction of money from the private citizenry in order to fund government is bad because there's waste. Waste results from the government doing that rather than a private citizen. And so it's bad. And the private citizen is good for reducing their tax burden because they're going to spend that money more intelligently, more efficiently for sure, than a government would. But then one might argue and say, well, what about roads? Is a private citizen going to work? Every private citizen is going to go out with a shovel full of asphalt and more efficiently build an interstate highway. What if this person got in an argument with their neighbors and they wanted the highway to go here and they wanted to go highway there, and they both put a shovel where they thought the highway should go, and now there's two highways and they don't get finished because other people didn't cooperate. And so it needs a government to inefficiently, for sure, build a more efficient road. So the government is going to do it very inefficiently, but the result will be more efficient because the interstate highways will connect with some thought that you and your neighbor couldn't think about because, you were just arguing about the fence last week and, and so they want this and you want that, et cetera. And so you need a government to think about the big picture, the whole country, not just your little squabble with your neighbor and whether you think it should be concrete and they think it's asphalt. And you both very efficiently mix up your 5-gallon bucket, but it's more efficient. We need governments, however inefficiently and bureaucratic they are, to do these big things that only governments can do. So then is the government bad or good? And going back to this polarity, to any polarity, is it good to have white? Is white a good color? What about light? Is light good? Usually in most of our religious frameworks today, light is good and dark is bad. Because within any polarity, if you define something as the right way, you're also simultaneously defining something as the wrong way. In order for light to be good, dark has to, in a polarizing paradigm, in a polarity, has to be bad. Because otherwise, how could light be good in relationship to what? So you need light, and it needs to be, light has to be separate from dark, or you don't have language, first of all, and you're not aware of either one. So it disappears from human consciousness. Human consciousness is based on language. So if light is good because it's not dark, if white is good because it's not black, then first of all, there's an interdependency. Because in order for this to exist, it has to not exist here. So if it's referencing something else, if the existence of something references something else, then it is linked inextricably to something else. If hot is relative to cold, then hot and cold are linked inextricably in language, in idea, in consciousness, because we're defining it in relationship with something. Now, we say that we're defining it in relationship with its opposite. That's what we say. But if the definition, and for something to exist, it needs a definition. It needs to be defined. Now, to define something is similar to divide something. Divide, define, definition. So how do we define something? Well, if I asked a graphic artist to define my body, the first question is in relationship to what? Well, in this case, there's a white jacket and a black background. So I'm defining, I'm dividing the image. I'm taking, in this case, out here is something else. So we're talking about what's in frame. Out of frame, in frame, right? There's a boundary. Out of frame, in frame. So first of all, we're defining the world into what's in frame and what's out of frame. So that's the first division. And then secondly, we're dividing the body from the background. That's the next division. And in order to do that, we use things and say like, well, that's a black background. Now, why not use a white background? Well, because we couldn't define. How could the focus of the video be a person talking if they blended into the background? Because we could have a background of white and light blue colors and kind of random mottled things that would be camouflage, where the body would disappear into the background. We could also have sounds. We could have background sounds. See, because right now we're defining sound as counter to silence. See, now there's no distinction. There's silence in the background, and there's silence coming out of my voice. So if I ask you what was just said, what went on in the sound, you would say no thing. Because a word is a thing, the word is a sound. But the sound has to leap out of the silence. It has to diverge and divide from the silence. Now, if I played these same sounds, look, we did a test of all the different amplitudes coming out of my mouth. Those are, audio frequencies. Now, if we put speakers behind me and we played those same audio frequencies, not words, just those same audio frequencies, then my words would be camouflaged because they would sound exactly like the sounds that were already there. So I would say something, but there'd be no distinction, there'd be no division. So for division, we need contrast. And you couldn't understand what I was saying if it blended into the background. And you couldn't understand what you were seeing if that blended into the background. So for something to exist, it has to be distinct. For us to be aware of something, we have to divide it. We have to take the one, which is the whole composition, and we have to divide it. We have to make lines. We have to cut. We have to cut the one into pieces with words. And then we call this white. We call it a jacket. So reality emerges in the reconstruction of the divided bits that we've organized with language and with ideas. We say this is a white jacket on top of a light blue turtleneck that's worn by a white man with a whatever cap on a black background. And then we say, oh, that's what's happening, because we just invented it with all those words. We have an idea. And then we say this word and this word and this word were together against a backdrop of silence. And we say, oh, that's what's happening. These words are together against a backdrop of silence. And that's what our reality is, a reiteration of distinctions communicated visually and in this case, verbally. So we become conscious with distinction, but obviously this couldn't exist as a distinction if the entire screen looked like white felt and I put this white felt in front of it. It couldn't exist. We'd say, there's white felt, and there's white felt, and there's white felt, and there's white felt. This is a different white felt. How is it different? It's exactly the same. Right? So in order for something to exist, it has to be in contrast with something else. So the question is that contrast a relationship? Meaning, if this jacket doesn't get to exist if it's seen in front of a white felt background, it's just white, fuzzy texture, then there's a relationship between this and this. This backdrop here relates to what's going on here. There's a connection. And if if Philip doesn't feel any different, meaning if Philip is weightless and soundless and tasteless, then does Philip exist? How do I know Philip exists if he isn't a heavier weight? And you have to notice that his white is slightly different than this white, or you don't see Philip. You don't know what you see, but you don't see Philip if Philip looks exactly like the jacket. So it seems that there is a relationship between the foreground and the background, between whatever it is that you call me and whatever it is that you don't call me. What do you call this? To some extent, in order to create an object, you have to create the objects around the object that are not the object, or the object doesn't exist. Because if this is a jacket and Dane talking, and this is a jacket and Dane talking, and that's a jacket and Dane talking, and everything is a jacket and Dane talking, then it's meaningless to say that's a jacket and Dane talking. Well, so is everything, all the time. A jacket and Dane, so why even remember it? Why even put it back together? Why do anything with it? Why be aware of it if that's all that there is in the entirety of existence? It becomes meaningless, unconscious, indistinct. So we create one thing with another thing that we define as distinct from the one thing. Or there is no one thing that is noteworthy. We take note about distinctions. When it came to the 3-minute and 33-second point in the song, suddenly there was a shift. The music increased to this, and we note the distinction. It becomes noteworthy. And noteworthy things we remember, meaning we put them back together and recall them. We file them away as more important than what? The unnoteworthy things. So for there to be noteworthy things, there have to be unnoteworthy things. Otherwise, the noteworthy things are not noteworthy. If the entire history of the universe was that same crescendo of song, and it didn't rise up to it, it was it, that's just it, then you just tune it out. It's no longer noteworthy. So its noteworthiness comes inextricably from the unnoteworthy things around it. In other words, for something to exist, its opposite has to exist. In other words, opposites cannot exist without each other. In other words, opposites are the same thing because one cannot exist without the other, and the other cannot exist without the one. That's a very tight relationship. It's a co-dependent relationship. Because that's what co is. Co is two. Dependent is two. You cannot be dependent on nothing and still be dependent. I'm dependent on absolutely nothing. So why are you dependent? Well, I'm dependent on nothing. So that's independent. So co and dependent require something else. Now, there is no closer relationship that one can imagine than a co-dependent relationship. If black needs white, and good needs bad, and life needs death, and death needs life, I mean, if something isn't alive, how can it die? You can't kill something that's already dead. Death needs life. If there's no life, there's no death. If there's no death, there's no life. We certainly see that in physics. If we think of a rabbit dying and being buried in the ground, it's an intelligent thing to do with a dead rabbit. Rabbit falls over exhausted, or time to, old age, peaceful death and sleep, rabbit is dead. What do you do with the rabbit? Well, if you do nothing, the bees and various things will come and take the energy out of the rabbit. And where will those go? They'll go in the bees and the flies. The life in the rabbit becomes the life in the flies. The life in the rabbit becomes the life in the bees. If you bury the rabbit, the life in the rabbit, or the energy in the rabbit, is consumed by microorganisms, by fungi, by worms, and turned into what? Into nitrogen, among other things. And if you plant a rose on top of a buried rabbit, then you get a more brilliant rose. Why? Because the nitrogen in the rabbit's blood is transformed through the rose into more beautiful blossoms. In other words, if there is no death in the rabbit, there is no bloom in the rose. Now, we live in a very complex ecology, so you could say, no. I could put blood meal on my roses, not a dead rabbit. And where does that blood come from? Okay. I could put petroleum, artificial fertilizer, nitrogen. Petroleum fertilizer, what does that mean? Well, it was taken out of the ground as oil and processed, and now it's a chemical fertilizer, and then I can get that into a rose. And what is oil? Well, millions of years ago, there were dead plants and animals, and they got crushed, and they became oil. So we have a 1,000,000-year-old life becoming new life, or we have yesterday's dead rabbit becoming a brighter rose. Now then you look at it through the filter of language, through the paradigm of culture, and you say, is it good that that rabbit died? And we say, no, it's bad that the rabbit died. Who would want a nice rabbit to die, right? Who would want that? It's bad that the rabbit died. But it's good that the rose is more beautiful. It's bad that the rabbit died, but it's good that the rose is more beautiful. But the rose is more beautiful because the rabbit died. See, this is the crumbling point of culture, of consciousness, of polarity. White is good, the right side of God, right? The right side of God is good. The left hand of God, right? Lucifer was bad. The right hand, Michael, right? That's the righteous one, the right one, the righteous one is good. Now, if you cut the body in half, then you'll just have the right one, right? You just delete the arm, delete the left hand, If you just cut the body in two and throw away the left side of the body, the bad side, then the right side just happily goes on living, right? If you get out your chainsaw and cut your child in two because you wouldn't want them to have a left side, then the right side just continues happily growing, right? Or there is no right without a left. Or what if you take a tree and say, you're going to be a righteous tree, so you need to have branches on the right side. So, being a good totalitarian, you have to climb up the tree and cut all the branches down on the left side to discourage, to punish growth on the left side so that there's more growth on the right side. Well, the tree falls over because it was the balance of the right and the left that gave it stability. Or you could say the upside of the tree is good, because if we just go upward towards the Lord, and of course it would have to be a Lord because we're in this domain of opposites where whatever is the counterpoint is bad, because a lordess would be bad. If the Lord is good, the lordess, being different, is bad. If the right is good relative to the left, then the left is bad relative to the right. And up, going up, ascending, is good, because going down is bad. So if we could just cut the roots of the tree, because a tree grows equally to the right and the left, because living is good compared to dying. If a tree goes equally to the down and up, it lives. If the tree goes up and down in balance, if it goes left and right in balance, the tree lives with more grace, with more ease. Now, we could just tell the tree not to go down, not to look down there. It's like we do this with feces and all kinds of things like, don't look back there. Look here, eat new food. But what comes out the other end when we see a beautiful organic salad and say, that's good, but feces, how disgusting. That's good, but feces, so disgusting. Now, if salad is feces, if you don't get any feces without any salad, then just don't eat the salad, and you won't have any more disgusting feces. I was like, no, you don't understand. The salad is good, but the feces is bad. Thinking about higher levels is good. Thinking about fear and anger, that's bad. Thinking about love is good. Thinking about suffering, that's bad. That's being negative. Being positive is good. You know, one could put one's terminal, connect a battery to a car and then only connect the positive terminal, because the negative terminal, it has a big minus on it. Oh, that's bad. It's black also, right? You have red, positive, red, nice plus sign, more is better. You have a minus sign, negative, black, bad. Don't connect with that. Just connect your car to the positive terminal. But there's no electricity. So you're saying the bad terminal is just as important as the good terminal? If you want electricity, electricity is the flow between two opposites. Are you saying that black and dark is just as important as white and light? Only if you want color. Because all color emerges as the third energy out of the polarity of black and white. If you just have white, you don't get red and orange and all that. If you just have black, you don't get red and orange and all of that. As the one that was severed with language returns to symmetry through the balanced integration of polarity, you create synergy, you create the third energy in between. Everything exists in the third energy, in the polarity between the extremes that are created with language. If there is no possibility to do harm, I take a knife, I put it on my body, and I cause harm to my body. Is that good? Is that bad? It's bad. Why? Well, you could permanently injure yourself. People commit suicide by cutting their veins. It's bad. Why? Well, because look at all the potential that was lost. The potential for what? Well, you had the potential to go out and solve cancer. And you just ruined it with one cut of the knife. You had the potential to go out and solve cancer, to live a happy life. And you had the potential to generate 100 tons of garbage. That's the average deposit by an American into a landfill or incinerator. 100 tons of garbage over the course of death. You had the potential of irritating and nagging your spouse for the next 50 years. You had that potential as well. But it was so much potential. But the potential goes out in all directions equally. You had the potential to suffer more, and you had the potential to love more, and you had the potential. It's like, yeah, we don't want the bad potential. Is freedom good? Yes, freedom is good. Now, are you free if you cannot cut your hand? Well, you're free in every area but that. You can't cut your hands. What about watch a sitcom? Well, sitcoms are bad. We all know that. They're not very well written. Advertising pollutes the brain. You could be doing more constructive things outdoors, being more healthy. So no sitcoms and no candy, that rots your teeth, and no pornography, that reduces sexual potency. Over the years, they've shown that people cannot ejaculate with their own wives because they're so busy watching pornography, and it's bad. It's bad. They should be ejaculating in their wives. That's good. Ejaculating in Kleenex is bad. And why? Well, it ruins the story of marriage, and marriage is good. What about someone whose happiness went down when they got married? Well, they didn't do it right. They didn't do it right. Well, what about being happy over here? These people who are happy being single, are they wrong? Well, they should get married, and then they should do it right, and then they should be happier. And if they're not, well, they just didn't do it right. They didn't do it right. But they should have been, but they didn't do it right. What about you? Did you do it right when you said they would be happier, but they weren't? Did you do it right? Was your advice good advice? Oh, it was good advice. It wasn't bad advice. No, it was good advice. But they didn't do it right. But my advice was good. Now, could you have given bad advice? Were you free to give bad advice? Oh, lots of people give bad advice, but my advice was good. Now, if you could only give good advice, that was the only possibility, was giving good advice, would it still be good advice if it couldn't be bad? If there was no potential of giving bad advice, so all advice was good, then what would make it good relative to what? If there was no bad advice that was possible, could there still be good advice without bad advice as a reference point? And if not, is bad good so that good can be good? Because good wouldn't be good if it was impossible for good to be bad. And because you couldn't be free to do good if you were not also free to do bad. And freedom is good, and we need bad to be one of the options in order to be free. Because if there's only one good thing, only one God, the right one, of course, and that's the only one, and there's nothing else you can do and think, would it be love if you look around and there's only one human being on the entire planet, one, for all time, you say, you know what? Out of all the people there are, I choose you. Is that as valuable a choice and as important a choice, as meaningful as a choice, as there are 6 billion people? And of all the people, of those 6 billion people, I choose you. Now, if choice creates meaning, and value, is choice good? And if choice is good, is it good that you have a good choice and a bad choice? And if good choices are good, that depend on bad choices being bad, is it good that there are bad choices that are bad to contrast the good choice that is good, so that you have the ability to make the good choice freely? Because you couldn't make the good choice freely if there was no bad choice to make, and if you didn't have the freedom to make the bad choice as well as the good choice. Could you make a free, good choice? And so, if the free, good choice depends on the ability to make free, bad choices, and the bad choices depend on the ability to be bad, which depends on what's bad, meaning that what's bad has to exist in order for freedom to exist. Is badness good because it exists as a teacher, as a consciousness accelerator of what's good? And if bad is good, should we have more of it or less of it? And is that possible? Because if the sphere is cut into two, that's the nature of a polarizing paradigm, of a polarity. We take the one and we cut it into two. Now, if those two are opposites, two poles, is it possible to have one bigger than the other? Can you have a 1 cut in half with one half bigger than the other half? Like if you go to a physics teacher and say, I have this ball, I want to cut it in half, and I want to know if this half can be bigger than this half. Is that possible? Well, the physics teacher will say, well, if it's half, by definition, a half is always equal to the other half. And in polarity, how could you cut the body in half and say the right side of the body was different from the left side of the body? How could you do it? How could you cut something down the middle with everything on this side of the middle being right and everything on this side of the middle being left, and have the right side be bigger or smaller than the left side? How could you end up with unequal halves, in other words. So, is good better than bad? Is good bigger than bad? Well, if they are opposites, cut out of a sphere, meaning you have the unconscious integrated ecology, and you enter a polarizing paradigm and cut something in half, could one half be bigger or smaller than the other half? Now, is the right side at war with the left side? Is the light at war with the darkness? Or are they in partnership in the creation of all color? Are all the many infinite possibilities that are born between the synergy of all polarity, are they mother and father of all that is? Now, if something is the mother and father of all that is, should you kill the mother before or after birth, right? I never did like my mother. If you kill her before birth, but the child was good, but you murdered the child. If you killed her before birth, but you want life to continue, how does that work? What about Dad? Fucked up loser. Get rid of him, right? Before or after birth? What about your great-grandfather who wasn't much when it came to reading and writing, a bit of a dunce? Wasn't very nice here, he wasn't very nice. What about great-granddad? What a jerk he was to Aunt May, right? Let's just get rid of him. Let's get rid of him. The family, where is the family? See, great-grandfather died. We got rid of him because that was bad. But look at little Joey. He's not there either, right? He came after, right? He came through the polarity. What about Genghis Khan? If you go back far enough, or what about some of the tribes on the African plains? I believe genealogically we go back to 100 people or so on the African plains. Every person on the planet today, and we say, oh, Madonna, she's so sexy and lovely. But who were Madonna's great-great-great-great-great-grandparents? And we look at someone else and say they're too fat, right? Well, who were their great-great-great-grandparents? So what's left here? If you cannot have life without life, if you cannot have the right half without the left half, if the children are good but the parents are bad, if the culture is bad but the people it gives rise to are good, if the people who are rebelling against the culture are good, but the culture that gave birth to them is bad, how does that work? So, I'm not suggesting that anyone stop doing what makes them feel good? And it seems like a lot of what makes people feel good is blaming and punishing parts of themselves and parts of the other, whether it's the parent, the partner, the government, the terrorists, whatever, part of the other, and defining self as I am this way, and those people are that way, and I'm good, and they're bad. And I'm good because they're bad, and because I'm different. And I couldn't be different if they didn't exist. So thank goodness they exist so that I can be different from them and throw scorn at them. But in throwing scorn at them, I am, of course, cutting the tree that I'm standing on. Because my identity, my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is distinct from them. I'm, of course, the good one. No. They're the good one, and I'm the bad one. They're lovable. They're fine. I'm unlovable. Well, how could I be unlovable unless there was something lovable? You know, it's a meaningless term unless lovable is possible. So how could I be unlovable if they weren't lovable? Oh, my sister, she's so pleasant and da-da-da, and she's so lovable. But me, I'm not pleasant. I'm not lovable. How could I exist doing my unlovable thing if the lovable didn't exist? And how could they exist and be lovable if it wasn't for me being unlovable? So which side of the coin do I want to be on? Do I want to be the lovable one who can't exist without the unlovable one? Or do I want to be the unlovable one who can't exist without the lovable one? Because that's lovable. But me, I'm not lovable. Well, there has to be a continuum of lovable for that to make any sense. And I have to be on one side of the coin, and they have to be on the other. Either they're not lovable, but I am, or they're lovable and I'm not, because we're different. And we can't have everything being lovable, or there's no language. I mean, if we're all lovable and we're all energy, then what makes me distinct and special and different and this? We're just all lovable and energy. And now there's no consciousness, there's no language, there's no great debate, there's no war. So thank goodness there's a war so that we can be clear where we stand. I stand here, you stand there. Well, if they are all in the same place, then how could I stand here compared to there? So thank heavens there's a war so that I can stand here in the right way, pitted against the wrong way. They're the wrong ones, and they're here. I'm here. There has to be a division of space. Well, isn't it connected? I mean, what if you deleted there from the circle and took Utah and just cut it out all the way down to the molten core and evacuated it out to outer space, right? To get Utah all the way down to the molten core, because we wouldn't want any remnants to remain. We want a pure extermination of Utah. Got to get rid of those Mormons. Come all the way down to the Earth's core, get Utah out into outer space. So what happens? What happens to the good people in California, right? The free-thinking people. What happens to them? Well, the rivers going from California to Utah may have a little trouble. What about when they go into the molten core? The rivers don't flow into Utah anymore. They flow into the molten core that was where Utah was. And the Earth starts wobbling a little bit because it's rather a big mass to take more than 1 billion tons of parts of Utah and just remove it. So the Earth's doing a nice orbit, but not anymore. Now it's wobbling because there's no Utah. The water's pouring into the the molten core, and now there's jets of flaming molten core flowing into California because there's no Utah surface to stop it. And then water's going in to exacerbate the issue. The Colorado River dries up, right? Oh my goodness. What if this? What if this? What? It's not working. We were supposed to get rid of Utah, but just keep the rest the way it was. But now that we've gotten rid of Utah, California's not doing too well. And the interstate highways, driving across, you go into the molten core, burn up in smoke. Are Californians going to hell because they got rid of Utah? That's what the Mormons said. They weren't religious enough. Now they're driven into the molten core, a burning pit of fire for eternity. Certainly burning until you're incinerated at the bottom of the molten core. And the Earth's wobbling a little bit. Well, it's good, because now the Hitler's house fell over. Yeah, but what about the other houses that fell over because of the wobble? Well, that was just an accident. Is there good without bad? Is bad good? Is there black without white? Is white good? Every polarity is interdependent, codependent, and thus inextricably related to its opposite. What we do with that, within the domain of language, which is the domain of human consciousness, which is the domain of culture, what we do with that is our choice. A choice that would be meaningless if we did not have the ability to do good things with that choice, as well as bad things. A choice that would be meaningless if there were no bad things. Bad which would be meaningless if there were no good things. So here we are. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.